In this tutorial, we will look at the different curve types you can create in Grasshopper. There are quite a few, but I'm going to show you three: the polyline, the interpolate, and the Nurbs curve. I've already went ahead and created 5 points in Rhino and then brought those into Grasshopper using the point container component. And so if you want to create a curve with these points, you can go to Curve, Spline, and these are all the different types that you can create. We're going to start by just looking at this basic interpolate curve. And so to use this, you have to plug in all your vertices as a list. So if I plug the first one in, hold down Shift and plug in the second one, and then the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one, you can see it creates that interpolated curve based on the order that I use to plug in those vertices. Now, one thing that's really useful is the merge component, which is merge, which can be found here under Sets Tree Merge. And the reason I like to use this component is if I plug in point to D1 and then point 2 to D2, it'll keep adding to this list. So you can see I can keep going down this component and adding as many components or outputs as I want into this input, and it'll basically merge those into a result which I can then plug into V. The reason I prefer to do this is that you can easily change the order of those points without having to re-plug in everything. So I'd recommend whenever you have multiple values that are being strung together and plugged into a component, using the merge to keep those in an order that makes sense and allows you to change that order easily. Another thing about merge, you don't have to plug in anything as it keeps adding inputs to the component, but if you don't like the look of it, you can always either add more using the plus, and you have to access these by zooming in on the component. You can also remove them if you don't want to see them anymore. So that's the interpolate curve. There's a few other options like degree. So if I create a slider that goes from 1 to 3, for example, and I plug that in, you can see a 1 degree curve is like an angular curve with no curvature to it, just straight lines. And then 2 is slightly more curved, and then 3 is basically the same as 2 in this case. Also, periodic means closed. So if I do a Boolean toggle, remember the Boolean toggle allows you to toggle between true and false. If I plug that into periodic and I have it on false, it'll be an open curve. If I double click, it'll create a closed curve with those shapes. So that's a really nice feature within these components. The next one we'll look at is curve, spline, polyline. And so I'll just use these same vertices for the polyline. And then the only option really here, let me go ahead and turn this one off, is to use the toggle to make it closed or open. So if I double click, it's open, for false it's open, and then double click again, true is closed. And so a polyline is always a straight line segment curve, so there's no curvature to the line. So polyline, if I'm ever doing like straight line work, I tend to use a polyline. The next one is curve, spline, Nurbs curve. And so a Nurbs curve, if I plug those vertices in, is similar to interpolate, but instead of the line actually going through, let's turn this off and turn this on. Instead of the line actually going through the points like an interpolated curve, the Nurbs curve uses those as weights. So it just kind of uses them to influence the creation of that line. The line doesn't actually go through the point. So just like the other curves, I can use my Boolean toggle, copy and paste it to make it periodic or not, so I can close it if I want to or not. And then you can also change the degree just like the interpolated curve. So if I plug this in to here, you can see I can toggle. A 2 is kind of more weight toward the points. 1 is going to be just like a polyline, so it'll be straight line segments. And so you can actually change that. If you hover over here, you can see and right click, you can also set the integer directly in here, and you don't need a slider if you know exactly the degree of curvature you want. If I create a new Nurbs curve and use the vertices, you can see it'll still make the curve. So let me preview this off. It just automatically uses a value of 3 by default.